Chapter 13, No Monsters. Samantha filed my petition the day before the deadline. In it, she filed 31 reasons why I should be granted a new trial: prosecutor misconduct and racial discrimination, ineffective assistance of counsel, and not being able to hire a real expert, to name just a few. I read the list over and over again, and I felt hope. I let some of the other guys read it. They passed it from cell to cell.
1. Newly discovered evidence. 2. Denied an effective assistance of counsel at guilt/innocence penalty and appellate process of his case violation of his rights under the law and Constitution of Alabama in the 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. 3. The trial court erroneously consolidated two separate capital indictments. The trial erroneously precluded Mr. Hinton from presenting evidence at both the guilt and innocent and penalty phase of his trial, and he successfully passed a polygraph examination in which he was denied involvement in the charged capital offenses. 5. Falsification of the records that supported Mr. Hinton's alibi defense to the uncharged offense, which stayed critically linked between Mr. Hinton and two charged capital offenses, violated his right and rendered the verdict and sentences in the cases unconstitutional. The trial erroneously permitted the induction of Mr. Hinton's oral statement up to the police. The publicity surrounding the charges and uncharged offense made it impossible for Mr. Hinton to receive a fair trial in Jefferson County, and thus his rights to a fair trial by impartial jury under the 5th, 6th, and 8th, and 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution were violated. The prosecutor's misconduct and arguments at guilt/innocent phase and were improper and violated Mr. Hinton's rights. The failure to fully transcribe the trial court proceedings deprived Mr. Hinton of a full appeal and certiorari of mandated review of his court sentence and conviction. Mr. Hinton was deprived of a fair trial. 10. Mr. Hinton was deprived of a fair trial and fair sentencing by the prosecutor's use of peremptory challenges and racial discriminatory manners.
11. Mr. Hinton was deprived of an impartial jury through improper juror inclusion in violation of the 6th, 8th, and 4th Amendment to the United States Constitution. 12. Mr. Hinton was deprived of an impartial jury through improper juror inclusion in violation of the 5th, 6th, and 4th Amendments to the United States Constitution. 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Mr. Hinton's rights to a fair trial by an impartial jury were violated by the trial court's restrictions dire examination of the prospectus jurors and the trial court's interference in the jury selection process. 14. Mr. Hinton's rights to a fair trial and a fair sentencing were abrogated by his convictions and death sentences being based upon insufficient and unreliable evidence of his guilt in the charged offenses. 15. Mr. Hinton's right to a present day defense was abrogated by the court's failure to grant trial counsel's request for extraordinary expenses to hire a ballistic expert to counter to two ballistics experts who testified for the state. 16. The seizure of the gun from Mr. Hinton's mother's home was invalid, and thus its introduction into evidence, and any testimony based upon the seizure or regarding the gun was improper. 17. The trial court's failure to instruct the jury on lesser included offenses violated Mr. Hinton's rights and deprived him from a fair trial and rendered his convictions and sentences of death invalid. 18. Mr. Hinton's right to a fair trial was abrogated by admission of evidence regarding the Smotherman incident, without which there was no evidence to support Mr. Hinton's convictions for capital murder. 19. Mr. Hinton's right to a fair trial and fair sentencing were violated by the admissions of Reginald Payne Wright's testimony. 20. The state's introduction of prejudicial and highly inflammatory photographs and other documentary evidence at Mr. Hinton's trials violated his rights.
21. The prosecutor's misconduct and arguments at Mr. Hinton's sentencing hearing were improper and deprived him of fundamentally fair hearing and due process. The participation of the descendants, family members, in Mr. Hinton's prosecution was highly improper and denied Mr. Hinton a fair trial, a fair sentencing, and due process. 23. The statutory presumption that any aggravating circumstance proven during the guilty-innocent phase is considered proven beyond a reasonable doubt for purposes of the penalty phase is unconstitutional, and thus Mr. Hinton's death sentence has violated due process under the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. 24. Mr. Hinton's right to a public trial was denied when his mother and sister were asked to leave the courtroom. 25. Evidence of stimulated trips between Inslee, where Mr. Henson was working, and the location of the smotherment incident was improperly admitted at his trial. 26. Evidence rebutting Mr. Henson's alibi defense was improperly admitted before any evidence supporting his defense had been introduced. 27. Evidence of out-of-court identification was improperly admitted at Mr. Henson's trial. 28. Mr. Henson's right to a fair trial and fair sentencing were abrogated by the way in which his trial and his sentencing was conducted. 29. Expert witnesses were improperly permitted to testify based upon evidence that was not admitted at the trial. 30. The trial court improperly heard testimony from his own bailiffs at Mr. Henson's sentencing proceeding in violation of his rights to a fair sentencing. 31. Alabama's death penalty is and discriminatorily applied in violation of 8th and 14th Amendments.
Soon everyone was talking about my case. I didn't know what some of the things that on the list meant, but I used my time in the law library to research. I had studied the amendments in the Constitution in high school, but definitely needed a refresher course. It was great. It was great just to have something new to read, something new to talk about. Henry seemed particularly interested in my case. It sounds good, right? Henry said, like you should be let go. You have a solid case. You really are innocent. I laughed. I know everyone says that, but I'm really innocent. And I'm really going to walk out of here someday. You just wait.
I'm sorry. I didn't tell Henry that I left the road every day. I didn't tell anyone. I could be there for meals when the guards needed me to do something, but the minute my mind wasn't occupied by the routine of the row, I left. My jet plane, what's the row? The row? Oh. I left. My jet plane was always waiting, and it got easier and easier for me to travel in my mind. Sometimes Henry would ask me what I had been doing when he was calling out to me, and I would say I was in Spain. I was in Spain, Henry, but I'm back now. What do you need? I think people thought I was losing it a bit, but escaping in my mind gave me a sort of giddy sense of freedom. I could tune out the moaning and the roaches, and the smell of death, and the food that had no taste, and the endless worry about who would be the next burn up in that chair. Every time an hour would pass by without me being aware of every slow second of that hour was a gift. Every day was the one before and the one after it. And there were so many days when nothing at all happened. Nothing, just silence or moaning or guys yelling nothing at each other. We did our time in our own way. One guy would just draw spirals on a piece of paper all day, every day. Spirals within spirals within spirals, so that you would never where anything ended and anything began.
That's how it was. Some guys just spent time between meals trying not to go crazy. They would hum or rock themselves. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Or moan in a way that was almost sounded like chanting. Humans were not meant to be locked in a cage, and a man couldn't survive in a box. It was cruel. A lot of guys had mental illness or were born slow. Others would rip off their faces with their bare hands if they were given the chance. We weren't a collection of innocent victims. Many of the guys I laughed with had raped women and murdered children and sliced innocent people up for the fun of it, or because they were high on drugs or desperate for money and never thought beyond the next moment. The outside world called them monsters. They called all of us monsters, but I didn't know any monsters on the row. I knew guys named Larry and Henry and Victor and Jess. I knew Vernon and Willie and Jimmy, not monsters. Guys with names who didn't have mothers who loved them or anyone who had shown them a kindness that was even close to love. Guys who were born broken or had been broken by life. Guys who had been abused as children and had their minds and their hearts wrapped by cruelty and violence in isolation long before they ever stood in front of a judge and jury.
I was there with I was there with these guys part of the time, but the rest of the time I left them. I left them all. I watched college football games in my mind. I learned to fly a helicopter. I had a boat and a Cadillac and more women than I knew what to do with. I would eat from the finest restaurants, wear the nicest clothes, and visit the most beautiful and wondrous places in the world. Traveling in my mind was like reading a good book and being transported to a completely different world. And a part of me felt a little guilty that I could escape this way when so many guys were suffering.
The state responded to my petition and basically denied everything we had claimed, saying that all my claims were perjurously bear to speak her truth. Please not today. Because an issue was either already raised during my trial or perhaps direct appeal. Or it could have been raised by my direct appeal, but wasn't. It didn't make any sense to me. It didn't seem to matter that I was innocent, that people lied, that there were real issues with my trial. The state didn't want to admit that anything was wrong, and unless you knew it was wrong or should have known it was wrong or could have known it was wrong, but didn't, you couldn't argue it. Henry explained to me if your attorney could have raised something during your trial and first appeal but didn't, it bared by the state. If it was raised at a trial or in your first appeal and you were still convicted and denied, it's also bared by the state. But doesn't that cover everything I asked? I mean everything, but you would have put on, pretty much.
It didn't seem fair or right that the odds are stacked against me, against all of us. If you couldn't afford to get an attorney at your trial or appeal, it seemed like you would never be able to prove you were innocent. A hearing was set for April 23rd, 1991, but then at the beginning of the month, I got a note from Santa that my hearing was being postponed. She sent me a copy of the official notice she filed with the court withdrawing as my attorney. She couldn't represent me anymore because of a new job in D.C., but she said that another attorney would be taken over. Brian Stevenson's office would send someone. She told me that they were going to amend my petition and change the hearing date, and that it was now a Rule 32 hearing because Alabama changed the rules of appellate's law, but not to worry.
I tried to take it too long. I tried not to take it too long. I called Lester and asked him to check in with the resource center in Montgomery, trying to get hold of this Brian Stevenson to see if he knows anything about the new attorney. I asked. Tell him I'm innocent. Tell him I'm supposed to have my hearing on my petition. Lester always took care of things for me. He still drove to Holman every week, even though he had turned away a few times because the prison was on lockdown or there wasn't enough guards at work today. Ever since I had passed around my petition, guys were trying to appeal the wood. We started to let on our side of the road. But it was hard to yell at each other knowing exactly who was talking to who. Listen to this, I yelled out as myself as a position. Excuse me. This kind of justice a criminal defendant cannot depend on how much money he has.
The guys debated this up and down the road all day. Money determined everything, and none of us had any money. I was showering next to a guy named Jimmy that night when he said, Hayes has money. If anyone's going to get out of this place, it's Hayes. Who's Hayes? I asked. Henry. Henry says, the KKK guy. You know the KKK has money. He will get out. I walked back to my shower in shock. I knew who Honey Hayes was. Everybody in Alabama knew that he and a couple of other white guys had a missing black boy named Michael Donald in Mobile in 1981. It was the last one shoot. The kid had been a teenager, 15 years old, and the KKK was mad that a black guy on trial might get away with killing a white policeman. I thought it had been a mystery. It was no good. But I can't remember. Eddie Hayes' father was rumored to be head of the KKK or something. That poor Donald boy had been randomly picked up and beaten and stabbed and then hung from a tree like a piece of meat. Damn. For his mother to find. Damn. She had sued the Klan or taken. I couldn't remember, but I remember being sickened by the murder. Michael Donald hadn't been much younger than I was, 5 or 6 years, and the story had reminded me of the bombs growing up, and the kids who had the dogs let loose on them, and the girls who had been murdered in the church. The news about the lynching had agreed. I had no idea. Oh, sorry. I had angered me. I had no idea that my friend Henry was actually Henry Hayes. I went back to my cell that night and stared at the ceiling. I was Henry's friend. He knew I was black. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to understand. Henry, I yelled. What you want, Ray? I just figured out who you are. I didn't know there was no answer right away. And I wondered what Henry was thinking. Everything my mom and dad taught me was a lie. Ray, everything they taught me against blacks, it was a lie. I didn't know exactly what to say. back to him. You know just about everything I believe about people. I learned from my mom.
So
So
you,
you, oh, I'm
so
sorry.
you know what I mean, he said. Yeah, I do. I guess I was just lucky that my mom taught me to love people no matter what. She taught me to she taught me to forgive you. You was lucky, Ray. You was really lucky. She taught me to have compassion for everybody. Henry and I have compassion for you. I'm sorry your mama and your daddy didn't teach you the same. I really am. Me too. We didn't say much after that.
I can tell.
But the road was pretty quiet that night. We weren't monsters, we were guys trying to survive the best we could. Sometimes you need to make family where you find it, and I knew that to survive, I had to make a family of these men, and they had to make a family of me. It didn't matter who was black and who was white. All that kind of fell away when you lived a few feet away from an electric chair. Right now, we had more in common than not. We all faced execution. We were all scrambling to survive, not monsters, not the worst thing we had ever done. We were so much more than what we had been reduced to, so much more than could ever be contained in one small cage. On the next visiting day, Henry had a visit too. I sat with Lester and Sylvia, and we were laughing about something when I heard Henry call my name. Ray, come here for a second. He gestured me over. He sat with the older couple. I assumed they were his parents. I glanced toward the guard, and he wasn't paying me any mind, so I walked over to Henry's table. Ray, I want you to meet my father, Benny. Dad, this is Ray Hinton, my friend. I held up my hand to Henry's father. He just looked at me and then down at the table. He didn't say hello. He wouldn't shake my hand. He's my friend, my best friend. Henry's voice shook a little bit. His mom smiled at me faintly, and then the guard yelled to me to go sit down. Nice to meet you both, I said, and I walked back to my table. What was all that about? Asked Lester. That was about some progress, my friend, some crazy progress on death row. I imagined
it took a lot for Henry to stand up to him, to tell him that this large black man was his best friend. We never talked about the fact that his father wouldn't shake my hand. We kept living next to each other and surviving as best as we could. A new attorney came to see me a few months later. His name was Alan Blackie. He was from Boston. I had always been a Yankees fan. I was going to ask Brian Stevenson for some money to hire someone who could test the bullets again. We need an expert. We need to prove that there's no way your mother's gun used to kill those men. I nodded. I thought about this before. Payne was crucified on the stand, and we never thought he had told the truth. No one believed him. No one would ever believe him when he couldn't even operate the machinery to find the light on the microscope. I need you to get I need you to get the best of the best, I said. Alan Black nodded and laughed nervously. He didn't look me in my eyes. So while he wasn't who I would pick as my attorney, I was grateful he was there. I'll see what I can do, he said. I think I know a guy at the Jersey. I'll talk to Brian. Okay, you do that. It might be good for you to find someone from the South, though. Jerseys around here really don't like guys from out of town. I don't want to tell them what to do. I didn't want to tell them what to do, and they hadn't worked out so well with Persians. I went back to my cell after the visit, and Henry asked me how it went. Well, Henry, it's like this. I can get over the fact that you used to be in the KKK, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get over the fact that my life is now in the hands of Red Sox fans. Henry and some of the other guys started laughing. I smiled. As long as I was making them laugh, we were still alive. I was tired of talking through the bars, though. I was tired of standing in my mouth pressed against the dirty mesh wire every time I wanted to talk to another human. I thought about Wallace and his Project Hope. I thought about the passing of my list of 31 reasons why up and down the road. Henry, I yelled. Yeah, I'm thinking about starting a book club. A book club. I'm going to see if we can meet in the library once a month and have ourselves a book club. You in? He paused for a moment. I'm in, he said. I want in. Another guy named Larry. Yelled another guy named Larry. Me too. Who's that? I asked. It's Victor. I want in. We're all going to read, though. Why wouldn't your book club just be a Bible study? No, I'm going to get some real books in there. I'm going to talk to the warden, and we're going to get some real books. And we're going to have ourselves a little club. I crossed my eyes so I could leave my mom. And now I'm going to show these guys that they can lead to. I remember being in school and reading a book about California and getting so lost in it, I swear I could smell the salt water of the Pacific Ocean. I just needed some books, and then we all could leave this place together.
Can I go to the bathroom? Oh.